Good morning. My name is Mark, and this is my presentation on Southern Gothic literature. And in this presentation, I kind of want to just give a brief overview of this subgenre, as well as how it's kind of unique from other subgenres. I'm also going to be covering Flannery O'Connor's short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, and giving a short analysis of that short story. After watching this presentation, ideally you should be able to give a brief definition of the subgenre as well as how it differs from other subgenres of Gothic literature, especially how it might be different from just the umbrella of American Gothic. Um, Also, you should have kind of a general understanding of the storyline of the short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, and be able to kind of explain um, the kind of underlying themes as well as social commentary behind the short story. So, what is Southern Gothic? Well, Southern Gothic started in early 19th century, so early 1800s Southern America, and a lot of authors at the time saw this as kind of an ill period of American history. This is a time of, there's the Civil War, there is slavery, obviously, is a big one. So some big themes here. We have racial tension is going to be one of our most prevalent themes here, as well as alienation. So during westward expansion, there's a lot of just empty spaces with no one to inhabit them, right? So this gave authors a lot of material to write on alienation, loneliness, etc. So some famous authors of Southern Gothic, Edgar Allan Poe is going to be the most recognizable. And while not all of his short stories are going to be super clear in terms of their location and stuff like that, a lot of his works can be tied specifically to Southern Gothic. The most seen as the most like prolific writer of Southern Gothic is going to be William Faulkner. He wrote a lot in that subgenre, and as well as Flannery O'Connor. Flannery O'Connor is the author of the short story that I'm covering, A Good Man is Hard to Find, and she wrote a lot of short stories in this genre. So, excuse me. So, what makes Southern Gothic literature unique? So, I have this separated into two sections. We have themes and locales. Now, not all of these are going to be specific to Southern Gothic 100% of the time, but I think these are good indicators of something being under the subgenre of Southern Gothic. So a huge one is going to be racism and slavery. This period of time in America was a lot of racial tension, a lot of discrimination, segregation, stuff like that. So that's going to be maybe our most prevalent one. But there's also themes of sexual repression. Things like homosexuality and stuff like that are not going to be were not as accepted as maybe they are today. So that was a lot of writers wrote on themes on those themes. Also, we have barbarism. The feral hillbilly was kind of a example that that a lot of writers wrote about. And in terms of locations, plantations were a big one. After the Civil War, a lot of these plantations were left empty, and this gave authors a lot to write about. A big empty plantation, a lot of authors saw as distinctly Gothic. Swamps were also a big one, as well as strip mines. So what strip mines did is they kind of brought Southern Gothic into a political space, right? Because if you're unfamiliar with what strip mining is, it's basically instead of mining underneath the surface, you're mining the whole space from the top and just digging a massive crater into the earth, right? So clearly this has major environmental repercussions, which gave authors it allowed authors to use Southern Gothic as kind of a political vessel, if you will. Excuse me. So I'm going to give just a brief summary of the short story, and then just a brief analysis of the short story after that. So the story starts out with a grandmother and her son, who has a wife and two children. And the grandma in the beginning does not want to go to Florida, which is where they're going. She wants to go somewhere else. She reads a news article about a serial killer in the area, and she's like, just not wanting to go on this trip, or she wants to go somewhere else. So the family declines. The family continues on their plan, and they stop at a place called Red Sammy's for lunch, where the owner, who's Red Sammy, um, kind of complains about how it's difficult to find a good man nowadays, which is going to give us the title of this story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. So after leaving, they take a detour because the grandma convinced the children that there was this plantation that she remembered visiting that had a secret room, and it was a good memory for her. So she convinces the children to convince the driver, who was their father, um, to go on this detour to visit this plantation. Well, while they're driving to this site, she has this recollection, and she remembers that this plantation is in a different state. They're going there. She has no idea where they're going, so this startles her and causes her to upend a cat that she had sitting at her feet, which she was not supposed to have. She was not supposed to bring the cat, but she remembers that they're going the wrong direction. She jostles the cat. The cat latches onto the driver, and then they swerve, and that upturns the vehicle, and now they're stranded on the side of the road. So they're here, they're at the side of the road, they're stranded, they're searching for help, and then they see a vehicle, and they're like, oh, wonderful, great, we're saved, right? But as the car gets closer, they realize that the driver of the vehicle is the misfit, who was the serial killer that she read about in the beginning. And she didn't really expect the serial killer to show up. She was kind of just using it as a talking point to go somewhere else. But this is what ended up actually happening. So, just in short, the misfit stops. They start helping the family, and then near the end of the story, the misfit's accomplices end up shooting the grandmother's son, daughter, and two children. And then, as the grandmother is trying to convince the misfit to spare her life, he shoots her as well. So, what is this story talking about? What is the purpose of this short story? So, the main thing here is defining what a good man is, right? And I could talk about this for a very long time, but I'm going to keep it very brief. So basically, the grandmother's perception of good transfers, like, it has this big transformation throughout the story. So in the beginning of the story, it describes basically what the grandmother values, and this is essentially vanity, right? So she wanted to be seen as a lady. She wanted to be seen as high of a regard as she could, and this was her top priority in life. There's a quote where she talks about if she was killed on the side of the road, she wanted onlookers to see that she died a lady, right? And so this was her highest value. And then as the story goes on, and now she's in the end of the story with a gun to her head, she realizes that this is essentially meaningless, right? This is not valuable, and excuse me. She just has this big switch of kind of what she values in life, and then she's shot, which leads to a great quote that I'm not going to quote perfectly, but the misfit says right after he shoots her, she would have been a good woman if there'd been someone there to shoot her every day of her life, which I think was that's going to be the most famous quote from this story. So there's a little bit of symbolism in this story that I'm going to cover super briefly. The automobile represents death, right? So the misfit shows up with his crew, and then death follows after that of everyone in the story, except for him and his accomplices. But the more interesting the more interesting symbol here is going to be the grandmother's hat, right? She, valued her clothing, her appearance, and her hat was kind of a representation of this throughout the story. And at the end of the story, when she's talking to the misfit, her hat falls to the ground and it breaks. And this is kind of a moment where the hat symbolizes kind of her value system. And when the hat breaks, she's basically her whole kind of perspective is shifting and kind of falling apart in this moment, which I think is a really cool little piece of symbolism there. Yeah, so I have my sources listed here. If you want to go read the articles, I found them very interesting. If anyone has questions, feel free to let me know. And thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it.